Welcome into your PFF State of the Franchise. It is your Minnesota Vikings edition. Sam, the big news in Minnesota? Quarterback. It is Kirk Cousins. They break the bank for Cousins' 3-year deal. It's fully guaranteed. What are your thoughts on this massive move by the Vikings this offseason?
That's the key, though. It's a fully guaranteed contract. It changes the dynamic of quarterback contracts in the NFL. Instead of giving him north of $30 million a season to have a 6-year blockbuster contract that completely reset the market, Kirk Cousins used his leverage in a different way. And he said, okay, I'm not going to go for 6 years, 3-year deal, but I want it 100% fully guaranteed. No matter what happens, I'm getting all of those millions of dollars. For the Vikings, it's actually not a bad deal that way, though, because it doesn't kill their salary cap the way the other type of deal would. And okay, they're on the hook for a fully guaranteed contract, but if Cousins stays healthy, they now have the spending money to still be able to maintain a championship caliber roster around Kirk Cousins. So I think it's actually a rare win-win deal for one of these blockbuster free agent contracts. And I think it does make sense. For the Vikings, they had essentially 4 quarterbacks to choose from this offseason. 3 guys of their own that were hitting free agency and Kirk Cousins. And they all had PFF grades in and around the same kind of area, around 85 in PFF grading. I think Cousins, though, represents a more likely 2018 grade to be in that same kind of ballpark, another 85. He doesn't have the injury question marks. He doesn't have a 1-year question mark like Case Keenum does. I think it's a smart deal to go for him and a savvy deal contract-wise to get him for that kind of money.
So this has been my question with Cousins through the years. He's never really, he's had really good stats, but he's never really played as well as the stats would have showed on a throw-for-throw basis. So just comparing his passer rating rankings, 2015, he was 5th in the NFL, but only 14th in PFF grade. And usually when there's that discrepancy, it's telling you he's had some luck or there's some sort of help there. That's why the passer rating is better than his PFF grade. 2016, 7th in passer rating, 9th in PFF grade. That's a little bit closer. But last year, similar, 14th in passer rating, 17th in PFF grade. He's always been elevated by his supporting cast, and that's one of my big concerns. He's going to a different team, different system. Washington didn't have the same kind of playmakers last year as they had the previous couple of years, but when he was thrown to Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, Jordan Reed, that's why his numbers were absolutely incredible. And Washington has been scheming up open throws for him more than any other quarterback in the NFL these last couple of years. That's my big concern with Cousins. He's put up good stats, but never really played as well as the stats would indicate. Can he duplicate that success in Minnesota?
Yes, because he's going to a wide receiver group that may be the best he's ever had, at least a tie with those really good receiving cores he had in Washington for a couple of years. Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs were both within the top 6 in terms of contested catch rate last season, bringing in contested catches. Stephon Diggs led the league in contested catch rate, despite being a relatively undersized receiver. So they got 2 guys, at least, that are able to go up, win passes that Cousins just gives them a chance with.
Is he going to give him those chances, though? He's used to throwing to open receivers left and right like he did in Washington.
Well, those guys get open as well. They just happen to be able to bring in contested catches. Those are 2 of the best receivers in the NFL. We in fact, said last year they were the best receiving duo in the league last season. Plus, you've got Kyle Rudolph. Plus, you've got Dalvin Cook in year 2 coming off a knee injury, albeit. You've got some playmakers there in Washington or in Minnesota to deal with. And the other point to bear in mind is that although all those quarterbacks ended up in the same kind of ballpark in PFF grade, Cousins is a more high variance quarterback, which I think ultimately is a good thing. That the numbers at PFF, the analytics have borne out that a high variance quarterback is ultimately more valuable than a guy who's just consistently middle of the road, because eventually it'll swing one way, and that's all the Vikings need to get over that hump and become a Super Bowl team, not just an NFL or an NFC Championship caliber team.
Yeah, I want to see what happens with Minnesota because organizationally they've done a good job of taking Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Bradford, and last year Case Keenum and making them a lot more on the game manager spectrum where they have taken good care of the football, where Cousins is always around the middle of the pack as far as turnover-worthy throws go, but he does make those bigger throws like you're saying. Do they harness him a little bit? Is that just the way they want to play? Because if they try to harness him, then they should have just brought Case Keenum back and have a harnessed quarterback, because last year Keenum was the number 9 graded PFF quarterback. I mean, that's essentially what Cousins has been at his best in his career. If they're trying to harness someone, they could have done that with Keenum. If they're going to unleash Cousins, that's a different story. but they might also turn the ball over a little bit more. I'm curious to see what they do from an organizational standpoint. Do they trust that defense and try to harness him a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, they're essentially paying $10 million or more, $8 to $10 million a year more for Kirk Cousins, gambling that he is a high enough percentage above guys like Case Keenum or Sam Bradford to bring them over that hump.
All right, so the bigger question right now is the offensive line. So as much as we're talking about Cousins versus Keenum versus Bradford versus Bridgewater, the offensive line was still a disaster last year. The sack total was way down, and a lot of people were saying, hey, the Vikings offensive line's better than the sack totals are down. But our numbers are showing it wasn't because of the offensive line. It was because of Case Keenum, because when he was pressured, he had the second lowest sack rate in the entire NFL. He was a magician handling pressure last year. Is Cousins going to be that same kind of magician?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a disaster last year. It was a disaster the year before. 2016, that line was a train wreck. 2017, it got back somewhere in the region of average. They were middle of the pack in terms of pass protection. They didn't allow as many pressures as the season before. It became a problem towards the end of the year, though, when injuries started to bite deep and they had to go to the bench. And the guys on the bench were the guys that were a disaster the season before that. So they at least shored it up to some degree last year, but they need to keep adding talent to this roster to prevent it sliding back to the way it was in 2016. If this team doesn't attack the offensive line in the draft, and I think early in the draft, honestly, this team is picking at the bottom end of the first round. That's where I think a lot of that offensive line talent is going to wind up. They need to be targeting an offensive lineman with their first pick in this draft. You know, I did a mock recently, and they took Will Hernandez, the guard out of UTEP, only allowed 3 hurries last season, stood up well at the Senior Bowl, even on one-on-one pass protection drills. He's a guy I think that could be a perfect offensive lineman for this Minnesota Vikings unit. Also has the kind of brute force and power that I think fits really well within this blocking scheme. He would be a dream fit for them at the bottom of the first round.
Yeah, given where they've put their resources the last couple of years, Riley Reif at left tackle, Mike Remmers at right tackle, does seem like guard could be a good fit. Also, your boy Frank Ragnow, who can also play some center, but he could project as a guard out of Arkansas as well, could be available there in the late first, unless we have something to say about it. We think he's more of a top 20 type of player. What about middle rounds? We have guys like Billy Price from Ohio State, Will Clapp from LSU, Austin Corbett. Those guys are all center/guard, maybe a Wyatt Teller out of Virginia Tech. Do they just have to address this in the first round, or can they wait till the second or third because there's some talent there as well?
They might be able to wait, but I think this offensive line needs more than one pick thrown at it. You know, the bottom of the first round, I think, looks like a fantastic value place to be chasing offensive linemen. They could use to come back in the middle rounds and get another offensive lineman. This offensive line really could stand an upgrade at any position. There is no position you're looking at that and saying, if we find a stud in this draft, we're not taking him because we have this guy in situ. Even Riley Reif, I think, is not replaceable if you find the right guy. The other 4 positions could easily be upgraded. There's nobody on this offensive line running into this season that had a PFF grade higher than 70 last year, which is basically your league average score. So
we know they're going to look at the offensive line. On the defensive side of the ball, this feels like one of those places where the Vikings are pretty good. They're deep on the defensive line, linebacker solid, secondary's gotten better every single year. But it's also dangerous to say, hey, we're set on defense. We can't look to improve there. They bring in Sheldon Richardson to kind of play that 3 technique, penetrating interior defensive linemen. Still think they could use some youth up front or perhaps in the secondary. What are your thoughts on Richardson and his fit with the Vikings? Because on the surface, only 1 sack last year, but I think he's going to help.
Yeah, don't be fooled by the 1 sack. He only had 1 sack, but he had 36 total pressures. No player in the NFL had as much pressure with only 1 sack, 1 or fewer sacks than Sheldon Richardson last year. So he was applying pressure. He just wasn't able to finish it into sacks. And as you like to say, pressure is a better predictor of future sacks than previous sacks was.
That's right. So you can't say he had only 1 sack. That's not a good pick. He had a ton of pressure. He'll get sacks next year.
The fact that he was able to pressure the quarterback a lot last year suggests that he'll probably get more than that 1 sack in 2018 and beyond. So I think that's a decent pickup for them. He can replace what they had in Sharif Floyd, who really injuries destroyed his career, basically wasn't a factor for the Vikings in 2017. They can get a player that can do that, and then the rest of that defense is all about adding depth and future contingency for guys that go down.
Let me tell you an unpopular opinion right now. All Vikings fans watching this are just saying, offensive line, that's what we need. What if I told you I wanted to pick a cornerback late first round? I know you've got Trey Waynes on the outside who took a big step forward last year, Xavier Rhodes on the other side, Mackenzie Alexander, you're still trying to figure out what you have there, but adding depth in the defensive secondary, always a good idea, in my opinion. And when you look at the value of the late first, early second round cornerbacks, if it's a Jair Alexander out of Louisville, maybe a Mike Hughes out of UCF, I think there's a really good value play there if you just want to take the best player on the board.
Yeah, it's not crazy. I think that secondary is a potential weakness there at cornerback. Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander inside, neither of those guys are proven studs. At most, those are guys that can hold their own and hope to get by. They could definitely use an upgrade then. And at the bottom of the first is also a really good spot value-wise for those cornerbacks, that next tier of cornerbacks, the same way it is for offensive linemen. So I think whatever they end up doing, the Vikings are actually well-positioned at the bottom of the first to address their two biggest areas of need.
Yeah, need and value will match up for the Vikings in the late first. They're looking pretty good at the play with playmakers, but it's that offensive line certainly needs some love when it comes to the draft and continue to add depth on the defensive side of the ball. It's the Minnesota Vikings, their state of the franchise, and it is powered by PFF Elite.